Detective Rico Martinez barely glanced at the Native American woman sitting straight-backed in her weathered pickup truck. Composed, dignified, showing none of the nervousness he expected. He claimed she'd been speeding through the school zone, demanded she exit the vehicle, and radioed for the mounted patrol unit. Within minutes, he declared that the horse had detected something suspicious in her behavior. When Elena Crow Feather questioned his assessment, the reins went slack and the stallion reared. What Martinez didn't know, what his arrogance prevented him from considering, was that Elena had spent 15 years training horses for the Bureau of Indian Affairs, teaching them to navigate dangerous terrain, respond to subtle cues, and distinguish between genuine threats and fabricated ones. The dust on the desert ground was real. But so was the justice that would follow. The October sun blazed mercilessly over the New Mexico high desert, casting long shadows across the mesas that stretched toward the horizon like ancient sentinels. The cottonwoods lining State Route 285 had turned golden with autumn, their leaves rustling in the dry wind that carried the scent of sage, juniper, and sun-baked earth. Elena Crow Feather drove southbound in her faded blue pickup, one weathered hand resting on the steering wheel, her silver bracelet catching the afternoon light. There was no urgency in her movements, no tension in her shoulders as she navigated the familiar curves of the highway that connected her reservation to the town beyond. She'd made this drive 1,000 times, transporting horses, attending meetings, visiting her grandmother's grave, and in her rearview mirror, the white and green patrol SUV emerged from behind a cluster of red rock formations about 50 yards back. No flashing lights, no aggressive acceleration, just presence. She glanced back at the road, maintaining her steady pace, her grip relaxed on the wheel. The patrol vehicle didn't pass. Instead, it matched her speed like a shadow, following at a measured distance, neither closing in nor falling back, just there. The familiar weight settled in her chest, the one she'd carried since childhood, the one that came with being watched, assessed, judged before a word was spoken. She'd learned long ago not to give it voice, not to let it show in her posture or her pace. The lights came on without warning, red and blue strobing against the golden landscape. Elena slowed gradually, pulled onto the shoulder beside a weathered fence post, and rolled down her window. The wind carried the sound of boots on gravel before Detective Martinez appeared at her door, his uniform crisp despite the heat, his expression already set in the mask of authority. "License and registration," he said without preamble, his tone suggesting this was already a foregone conclusion. Elena reached for her glove compartment with deliberate slowness, her movements visible and unthreatening. "May I ask why you stopped me, officer?" Martinez's eyes narrowed. "You were doing 35 in a 25 zone. School zone." She handed him the documents, her voice level. "The school zone ends at Mesa Road. We're 2 miles past that." "I call it like I see it," Martinez replied, raising an eyebrow. "You calling me wrong?" "I'm telling you where the speed limit changes," Elena said. "If there's something else you need to discuss, I'm listening." "Oh, you're listening." Martinez straightened, his hand moving instinctively toward his radio. "Got yourself all cleaned up? Driving through here like you own the place? You got some kind of attitude about being pulled over?" The silence that followed felt heavy as storm clouds. Martinez's jaw tightened, and he gave a short laugh that held no humor. "You think you're smarter than me," he said. "Got that quiet, respectful way of talking, like you're too good to show proper concern. Like maybe you think you know better than law enforcement." "I don't think anything about you," Elena replied, her voice unchanged. "I answered your question." Martinez stepped back from the truck, his hand moving to his radio. "Unit 7 to dispatch. Need mounted patrol backup on Route 285, mile marker 47. Suspicious vehicle, uncooperative driver. Request immediate assistance." The radio crackled to life. "Copy that, Unit 7. Mounted patrol en route. ETA 5 minutes. There was no discussion, no opportunity to clarify, no chance to de-escalate. Martinez looked back at Elena with a smile that had nothing to do with politeness. Now we'll get to the bottom of this. Within minutes, a horse trailer arrived, followed by another patrol vehicle. Officer Blake Thornton emerged, leading a large bay stallion named Thunder. The horse was magnificent, powerful, alert, but something in his eyes suggested a wariness that hadn't been there when he was younger. Thornton approached Elena's truck with theatrical confidence. "Ma'am, I'm going to have Thunder here check around your vehicle. He's trained to detect suspicious behavior and contraband." Elena watched as Thornton began walking the horse around her pickup, occasionally tugging on the lead rope in ways that seemed casual but weren't. The stallion's ears flicked back and forth, his head turning toward Thornton rather than focusing on the vehicle. "He's alerting," Thornton announced with hollow certainty, giving another subtle pull on the reins. Elena didn't move. "That's not an alert," she said quietly, her voice factual and clear. "He's responding to your cues, not detecting anything. There's no focused attention on a specific area, no change in breathing pattern, no pawing or head lowering. He's reacting to your signals, not following a scent." "Excuse me?" Thornton asked, his confidence faltering slightly. "I said he's not alerting. You're cueing him to react." Thornton's face darkened. "You some kind of expert on horses now?" "Yes," Elena said simply. "I am." That's when Thornton made his choice. Instead of acknowledging her expertise, instead of reassessing the situation, he loosened his grip on the reins and gave Thunder a sharp command that had nothing to do with detection work. The stallion reared, his hooves striking toward Elena as she tried to step back. The weight and power of the animal drove her to the ground, his hooves connecting with her shoulder and ribs with devastating force. The pain wasn't immediate, it was a spreading numbness that gave way to fire as blood soaked through her shirt and into the desert sand. She gritted her teeth, refusing to cry out, not from stubbornness but from the knowledge that showing pain would only fuel their narrative. Through the haze of agony, she could hear Martinez calling for an ambulance, his voice carrying a note of concern that sounded genuine but felt calculated. Elena drifted in and out of consciousness during the ambulance ride, her shoulder screaming with every bump in the road. When she finally opened her eyes in the hospital, the first face she saw belonged to her cousin David, a legal aid attorney whose expression mixed fury with determination. "You saw," she whispered. "Everyone did," David replied. "Sarah Running Bear was driving past when it happened. She got it all on her phone. The footage is already spreading online. News stations picked it up within hours." Elena nodded slowly, each movement sending fresh waves of pain through her injured shoulder. "They still trying to justify it?" David's expression hardened. "Martinez claims you were acting erratically. Thornton says Thunder was responding to genuine suspicious behavior." Elena's eyes sharpened despite the medication. "Get me the video." "I already have it," David said. "And Sarah has additional footage from different angles." "Good," Elena said. "Because they're not just lying about what happened. They're misusing Thunder." David leaned forward. "You ready to go public with this?" Elena looked down at her bandaged shoulder, feeling the ache that would probably never fully leave. "Not yet. First, I need to understand what they did to him." David nodded. "You'll let me know when you're ready. The tribal council is already asking questions, and the media attention is growing. We can't let them bury this." Elena closed her eyes, her mind already working beyond the immediate pain. She had spent years training horses for federal agencies, teaching them to be partners rather than weapons, to respond to genuine cues rather than manufactured commands. What she had witnessed wasn't just abuse of power, it was the systematic corruption of an animal she had likely trained herself. As David reviewed the footage with her, Elena's expression remained controlled, but something deeper shifted in her eyes. "Stop there," she said, just as Thunder reared in the video. David paused the playback. "What is it?" Elena reached for the tablet, rewinding the video several seconds. "Look at his ears. The way he turns toward Thornton before reacting. That's not detection behavior. That's learned response to a handler's cue. They corrupted his training? Elena nodded slowly. Thunder was part of the federal program I worked with 3 years ago. He was retired due to a minor injury and entered the donation system. But what Thornton did wasn't poor judgment, it was deliberate misuse of training he knew would produce that exact response. Over the following days, as Elena recovered, David's investigation revealed a disturbing pattern. Thunder wasn't the only horse that had been transferred from federal programs to local law enforcement. Records showed at least 6 other animals had been donated to various departments across the state, all handled by officers who had connections to Blake Thornton. Each case showed similar red flags: false alerts in situations where no contraband was found, aggressive behavior in low-stress environments, and handlers issuing commands that seemed designed to provoke rather than control. The pattern suggested systematic retraining of horses that had originally been taught restraint and precision. "He's reconditioning them," one of Elena's former colleagues said during a phone call. "Taking stable, well-trained animals and turning them into intimidation tools. Whoever's approving his methods either doesn't understand horses or doesn't care about proper protocol." Elena knew it was worse than that. The techniques Thornton was using weren't just wrong, they were specifically designed to undo the careful training she and others had spent years perfecting. He was taking horses that had learned to distinguish between genuine threats and false alarms, and teaching them to react aggressively to handler cues regardless of actual circumstances. 2 weeks after the incident, Elena left the hospital with her arm in a sling and determination burning in her chest. She had spent the recovery time not just healing, but investigating. Using contacts from her years in federal service, she had traced the network of retired horses that had been funneled into local departments. The trail led to a private facility on the outskirts of Albuquerque, a place that advertised advanced horse training for law enforcement but operated with minimal oversight. Elena arrived there after dark, moving carefully despite her injury, her knowledge of horses and their behavior guiding her through the shadows. What she found confirmed her worst fears. Stables full of animals that had once been her partners in federal service, now showing signs of stress, aggression, and confusion that came from contradictory training. Thunder was there, along with 5 other horses she recognized, all bearing the psychological scars of having their original training systematically dismantled and rebuilt around fear and dominance. Elena didn't try to confront Thornton directly. Instead, she documented everything: the conditions, the training methods, the records that showed how federal horses were being repurposed for intimidation rather than legitimate detection work. She gathered evidence of the systematic abuse that was masquerading as law enforcement training. When she finally went public, the story exploded across social media and news outlets. The footage of her attack, combined with evidence of the broader pattern of horse abuse, created a firestorm of outrage that reached far beyond New Mexico's borders. The trial that followed was a study in contrasts. Martinez and Thornton, in their pressed uniforms, attempting to maintain the facade of professional conduct, while Elena sat in the gallery wearing traditional jewelry and a simple dress, her injured arm still in a support brace, surrounded by members of her community who had driven hours to show their support. David methodically presented the evidence: the video footage, the training records, the testimony of other federal handlers who confirmed that the techniques being used were not just wrong but deliberately destructive. Each piece of evidence built toward the unavoidable conclusion that what happened to Elena wasn't an accident or a moment of poor judgment, but the predictable result of systematic abuse. The jury's verdict came after less than 4 hours of deliberation. Guilty on all counts. Martinez and Thornton were sentenced to prison terms. Their law enforcement careers ended, their actions officially recognized as the criminal abuse they had always been, but Elena knew the convictions were only the beginning. The network that had allowed this to happen, the officials who had signed off on the training programs, the administrators who had looked the other way, the system that had prioritized intimidation over genuine protection, all of that remained largely intact. The real work began 6 months later, when Elena opened the Desert Wind Equine Rehabilitation Center on land provided by her tribal council. The facility was designed not just to heal the horses that had been abused, but to demonstrate what proper training looked like: partnership instead of domination, communication instead of intimidation, respect instead of fear. Thunder was among the first horses to arrive at the center. Elena worked with him slowly, patiently, using the same techniques she had taught years earlier, helping him remember who he had been before fear and confusion took over. It wasn't easy, the damage ran deep, and trust, once broken, required time and consistency to rebuild, but gradually, Thunder began to respond, not out of conditioned fear, but because the space allowed him to remember his original training. The partnership that had made him effective without making him dangerous. The center became more than a rehabilitation facility. It became a training ground for a new generation of mounted patrol officers, people who learned not just how to give commands, but how to read an animal's genuine responses, how to ask for cooperation rather than demand submission, and most importantly, how to listen to what the horses were actually telling them. Elena walked among the trainees with quiet authority, not as someone seeking revenge, but as someone who had fought to reclaim what had been corrupted and was now focused on building something better. Every technique she taught, every principle she emphasized, was aimed at preventing another Thunder, another Elena, another moment when power was used to destroy rather than protect. At the edge of the training field, David often came to watch the progress. As Elena's attorney, he had moved on to other cases, but as her cousin, he remained invested in what she was building. He didn't smile often during those visits. The weight of what they had both witnessed was too heavy for casual optimism. But as Thunder trotted past with a new trainee, his posture relaxed and his movements fluid, David allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. At the far end of the field, Elena paused beside a young Navajo woman no older than 25, her uniform marked by the patches of a tribal police officer in training. The woman watched Thunder with the same mixture of respect and wonder that Elena remembered feeling decades earlier when she first began working with horses. The key, Elena said quietly, is remembering that they're not tools. They're partners. The moment you start treating them as extensions of your authority rather than individuals with their own intelligence and dignity, you've already lost what made them valuable in the first place. The young officer nodded, her attention focused completely on Elena's words. How do you know when you're asking too much? Elena smiled for the first time in months, an expression that carried both sadness and hope. They'll tell you. You just have to be willing to listen.